Okay, so let's now go to the first basic topic, the general organization of the nervous system. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about how your nervous system is organized into major divisions, and maybe we would touch on basic neuroanatomy, just the major features of this prominent structures in your nervous system. Okay, so let's go ahead. When you look at your nervous system, it has two major subdivisions. You have your central nervous system, or your CNS, and then you have your peripheral, or your PNS. How do you go about dividing that? The most easy part is just to remember what your CNS is made of, and it's made up of three important components. You have your brain, you have your brain stem, and you have your spinal cord. Now, let's draw that. You have your brain, okay, your cerebral hemisphere there, and then um, you have your cerebellum, and then you have your midbrain, your pons, medulla. Okay, those three make up your brain stem. And then you have your spinal cord there. So that's your CNS, brain, brainstem, and spinal cord. How about your peripheral nervous system? Everything that is not in your brain, brainstem, and spinal cord would be your peripheral nervous system. And that would be cranial nerves coming out of your cerebrum and your um, brainstem, and spinal nerves. Okay, so that's your peripheral nervous system, your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. Your spinal nerves, of course, will eventually turn into your median nerve, radial nerve, etc., etc. Okay, now there's another thing that you need to think about, and that's your autonomic nervous system, or your ANS. From the term itself, autonomic nervous system, this is automated. You don't think about it. It's not voluntary, but it's very important because it's an autonomous subsystem. It's like a computer chip that acts without prompting. Okay, so if you talk about your ANS, you have your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, or sympathetic response and your parasympathetic response. What are they? So for example, you're walking down the road, you see a blood spattered, zombie looking gorilla in front of the road. Your brain immediately is confronted with the option of fight or flight. Are you going to duke it out with the zombie gorilla, or are you going to try your luck running away? Okay, so your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, your heart rate goes up, your blood supply to the muscles kicks in, your breathing increases, your pupils dilate so you could see better, your senses are enhanced, and so you either fight or you run away. Okay, another one would be your parasympathetic. It kicks in when you're holding a nice juicy burger in your hand and you eat it slowly, and as you're As you've slowly finished it, your parasympathetic system kicks in. It's basically rest and digest. So it takes over. It improves the circulation of your intestines, your internal organs, so that you could digest this delectable food and distribute the nutrients accordingly. So your autonomic nervous system is a very important mechanism. And what's curious is that you can find parts of your nervous system in the CNS and in the peripheral nervous system. It could be as ganglion here in your spinal nerves, and there are also instances, or there are also cranial nerve nuclei that are part of your autonomic nervous system. So you can find parts of your autonomic nervous system in both central and peripheral nervous systems. Just something that you need to know. The autonomic nervous system is an important aspect, and we'll have a separate lecture for that. And all through your life, you will run through your your autonomic nervous system. So it's nothing to forget about. Okay, here's another organizational structure of your CNS versus your PNS. Well, mainly we're going to deal with your central nervous system, especially when you divide it, when you classify it according to development. Okay, you have your forebrain, your midbrain, and your hindbrain. It's important to know that, to know where your major components are a part of. Okay, so your forebrain is basically this one, your cerebral hemisphere. So your forebrain is made up of your cerebrum, the whole thing, and then your diencephalon, basically your thalamic nuclei over there. So that's your forebrain. Now your midbrain is that first part of your brain stem. Okay, that's your midbrain. And then your hindbrain is made up of your pons, your medulla. Okay, so basically here are your three brainstem parts: midbrain, pons, and medulla. And then lastly, you have the last part of your hindbrain, which is basically your cerebellum. Now remember guys, your cerebellum is part of the brain. It's not part of your brain stem. Okay, so your brain, your hindbrain may include your cerebellum, but when we're talking about brain stem, we're just talking about the three: this, and this. Okay, so I do hope it's clear. Your cerebellum is actually known as your little brain, and again, we're going to we will have a separate section for that. So it's an interesting part of your neuroanatomy. Okay, and of course you have your spinal cord, which we'll discuss later on. But anyway, we'll just draw that in just to be complete. Now, anyway, what's important is that you understand the basic anatomy, or the basic organizational anatomy. Okay, now let's go to your brain. Let's talk about your forebrain. Basically, okay, the topic now would be your brain. Okay, so if you look at it, let's draw. You have to learn how to draw. So let's draw your cerebral hemisphere like that. It's your cerebrum. Now, if this is your sagittal view or side view, okay, your front cut view or your coronal, other name for coronal is what? Correct. Frontal. Okay, so basically you have that, and then you have your temporal lobes there. Okay, now anyway, let's go back here. If you look at your cerebral hemispheres, you have one on each side, the left and the right. Okay, it's full of, you can see a lot of convolutions there. Okay, it's have you ever wondered why it's so full of folds? Or the main purpose there is to increase your surface area. So imagine putting a piece of paper inside your skull. If it's not folded, it takes up a lot of space. Okay, but if you crumple that piece of paper, you can make it into a very small piece, but you have these folds. So these folds are basically a space-saving way of putting a lot of neurons in a very small place. Now, um, here, if you look at it in front, in the coronal plane, you would see those folds there. Okay, and you will see those folds on both sides of the cerebral hemispheres, and those some of those folds are actually important landmarks. Just to let you know, the fold, okay, this one, this hill, so to speak, is called your gyrus. And then the valley, okay, the fissure there is called your sulcus. Okay, so gyrus and then sulcus. Okay, just to be clear. Okay, now let's go back to your sagittal section or sagittal view of your hemisphere. Note, color it different color. Note that there are two important sulcus or fissures there. They are very important landmarks. Okay, and we'll deal with them one by one. The first one is here on the side. This is called your lateral sulcus. It has another name. Look it up. The lateral sulcus or lateral fissure. And then you have this. You have your central sulcus. Okay? So those are the two most important landmarks there. Why? Because it's how you name different lobes and different gyri of note. Anyway, the most anterior part, anterior to the central sulcus, is called your frontal lobe. Okay? Just behind that is your parietal lobe. Okay? Just below, after the lateral sulcus, is your temporal lobe. And then at the very back is your occipital lobe. Okay? So each cerebral hemisphere has 4 lobes. Okay? Although there are some who would say that there are smaller lobes inside. But anyway, for the sake of discussion, let's just deal with these 4 major lobes. Okay? So, let's now go to your coronal section. Okay, now, you would notice that if you make a coronal section, you cut the cerebral hemisphere in half, you would note that it's not homogeneous. There's an outer darker layer and an inner whiter layer, and perhaps a few scattered islands of darker matter. Now, this outer matter here, okay, that is called your gray matter. And the inner one, this lighter one, is called your white matter. Okay? So what? I mean, what makes gray matter important? Knowing what gray matter is important, or knowing what white matter is important. It deals, or um it's all because of this, the basic part of your nervous system, which is your nerve or your neuron. Okay? Now, your neuron is basically composed of, well, three parts: your dendrites, your body, and your axon. Okay? Now, when we talk about gray matter, we are talking about this. So your gray matter basically is where you would find your nerve bodies. Okay? And your white matter is where you find these. So the axons, your white matter is usually made up of axons from these nerve cells. Now, question is, why white? Because they have found out that when you stain them, they stain white. Why? If you go back to your nerve physiology, you would remember that there are insulations. Okay, there are structures that provide insulation, and we remember these to be called myelin. Myelin makes sure that the impulses that travel through the axons are faster. Remember the term saltatory conduction. That's it. So your myelin covers your axons, and since you have millions and billions of axons there, you also have a lot of myelin. And myelin is very fatty. It's made up of fat. So it's pretty fatty, and that fat stains white. Okay? And because of that, now you have your um, white matter there. Now, in the next session, we will deal with the inside of the cerebellar hemisphere. Now that we've differentiated what is gray and what is white, that we'll move into that in the next session. Now we're nearing 20 minutes, and that's it for now. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.